numbers that are drawn are randomly drawn.
It would be like a random and run. For example, there's this problem. So you click on the number, there's visibility of the number.
Yeah.
That's close.
Exactly. So, but again, doing something randomly is not maybe as easy as it sounds.
Yes.
And we really need to avoid having patterns in what we do.
What about the other nine and its number as a random sample?
Sorry?
I take a sample of
Yeah.
so I take number 1, then I'm getting number 7. 27 is number 7.
Yeah.
Number 13.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Yeah. This is the very simple random sample. What you're alluding to is coming in a second. And so, population, randomly pick 4 people from the population, and you get this sample. And you see, there's 3 greens here, and 3 blues here, and 6 reds here, and ideally our sample reflects that, with 2 reds and 1 green and 1 blue being selected into the sample. This is our little micro-population. In this case, there's 100 people in the class, numbered from 1 to 100. And then this is a table of random numbers. So what you do then is look at the 2 last digits here, for instance, and based on that, draw the people into your sample. Which again, let's look at the characteristics. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 females in here, and 5 males, and that again reflects the distributions of 50 females and 50 males in the population. A stratified random sample. Every member of a subgroup of the population gets an equal chance to be represented in the sample. Let's stick to this example. So if you're interested in investigating and doing some research about people visiting the canteen, the cafeteria at the university, and you want to sample 50 students from those 500 that regularly go there, right? So the 500 is your population, you're interested in 50, but you're interested also to differentiate people that prefer ice cream to people that prefer chocolate. You want to, in the end, be able to maintain these, be very sure to maintain these characteristics with a structurally similar in your sample. You want your sample to represent these proportions. Now, a good random sample should actually do that, but sometimes we could be interested to enforcing that our sample is actually doing that.
Sorry, I'm still starting to someone using all actually there are students random and they sample. Where I've been always told to look for the pattern where it becomes easier to theorize. Where the sample responds to you has to read into patterns. So I don't know, I'm very confused.
Once again, I'm not quite sure I understand the...
No, what I'm saying is, there has to be randomness in a sample selection.
Yeah.
But then it has to lead into patterns. That's what I've been trained into. So I don't know, I'm finding it confusing.
But patterns in your sample should be the same patterns in your population.
Then you're saying there should not be any pattern at all, right?
No, there shouldn't be a pattern in how you randomly select.
Right.
The selection is totally random. But that leads to a sample which shares the same patterns, the same proportions, the same characteristics, the same structure as the population has. And I'll come to why that is the case. But it's not about the sample everything being randomly distributed or distributed totally unequally or whatever. It's the randomness of the selection process that makes that we get a sample which is basically the same as the population. Again, sometimes that's very hard to achieve with a simple random sample, and sometimes we're interested in maintaining certain proportions in our sample, and that's why we would use stratified samples. So what we would first do is, in this case, split up the group of 500 students into the 100 people that like ice cream and the 400 people that like chocolate, almost the other way around. 100 ice cream points. And then from those groups, we randomly select proportional to the distribution of the population. So we randomly select 10 people from the ice cream likers, because we want to end up with 50, and we randomly select 40 people from the chocolate likers. Yeah, we maintain the proportions of the population, which are actually known in this case, or need to be known, and then only sample from those subgroups. And we'll come to an example in a second where that has been partly applied as well, or where part of it was such a strategy. So yeah, our population looks a bit different because we can predefine the differences. There's the blues, there's the reds, there's the greens in this case. And then I want to maintain this proportion in my sample, and again would select in this case one red, one blue, one green, two reds. But not randomly from the entire sample, but randomly within the groups. Which in this case, interestingly, of course, leads to a very similar picture. And ideally, if you can truly randomize from the entire population, you should get the same picture. Sometimes it's hard. This is a kind of related way of doing things. And that's often happening when people do face-to-face surveys for bigger surveys. So these are streets and avenues, and you've got a population of blocks, right? And from those you randomly, ideally, if you can, select the number of blocks that you're interested in. In the next step, you say, okay, within those blocks, I list all households that live within the block. Yeah? And then from all of those households in the different blocks, you can again randomly select the households that you're interested in. Sometimes 6 work, and it's easier because you don't need a full list of all our households in all blocks. What prevents you from having to define the entire population beforehand by listing all out, then this list would be much longer and it would be much harder to get this list. But the big advantage is that here you only have to list those households that are in the blocks that you already randomly selected. There's a mobile phone. Systematic random samplers, I think what you were getting at. The idea again is very simple, very similar to a simple random sample, because every subject of the population does have an equal chance to get into the sample, get selected into the sample. But we do so, and sometimes that's very handy to do, based on a random starting point and a random interval. So, I throw my dice, 1 to 6, and that's my starting point for drawing a sample from this class. I start here. This is my starting point, and then I draw. My dice gives a 4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I start my sample with you. You're the first member to be selected in the sample, and then I throw my dice again, and the dice turns out a 3. Then I would select every third member of the group, starting with you. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Every one of you does have an equal chance to get selected into the group at the very beginning. Not after the first dice show anymore, because that includes those 3 already. They're out.
So do we need to select this, the 8th number which you decide, the number 3 which you select by random draw?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Can it be derived from the population and sample size?
Yeah, that's a good point. Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes we would, and it has a bit more of a random feel to it. but you could also define that beforehand. So what we often do when we analyze newspapers over a longer period of time, and one of the articles deals with that, by the way, in a way, is we randomly say, okay, I want to look at the Hindu Times in 2013. I randomly say which day of the week I start with. So, you know, a dice with 7 numbers ideally, or is it on Sunday, published on Sunday in the Hindu Times? Is there a Sunday edition? Because that's also something you need to consider. So a dice from 1 to 7, or a hat, drawing from a hat from 1 to 7, and that gives me the weekday I start with, which would be the Wednesday. And then I have predefined beforehand that I always add 8 days. So I do the first Wednesday of the year. I do the Thursday in the following week. I do the Friday in the following week. I do the Saturday in the following week, and so on and so forth.
Construct a week.
I construct a week, indeed. And that, you know, based on that you could construct weeks, you could construct months, if you look at 50 years, whatever you want to.
That would be systematic random sampling of construct a week.
I mean, well, at some point it will, yeah, because it's, I mean, the constructed week is mostly based on this 8-day interval because it always gets you a day further. Imagine you do a 3-day interval, it takes a bit longer until you have a, but it's still a constructed week in the end, because eventually you will have every weekday in the sample, only if you have a 7. Have a bit of a problem. The what? Continuous. If you do a continuous week, it's not a sample, you do the entire week. And then you have to think about what do you want to claim about? Do you want to make claims about a bigger population, or do you just want to talk about this week? This group here yesterday wanted to look at newspaper coverage 1 month before and 1 month after the election. That's fine, but then you need to be aware that your findings are about the difference between 1 month before and 1 month after the election. If you want to generalize bigger, then you need to think up different types of sampling strategies. Then you would take a year before and a year after and sample within that year maybe.
If you are doing a 2-year study, for example,
Yeah.
the construction of week, how do you do that? Because days or dates, what is important? Thursday of every second week of March, or the date is how do you do this selection?
You define what you prefer, you want to do, and what you think is best to do in order to answer your research question. And it's an interesting, I'm a bit hesitant to say this is the best method. Because, you know, it depends on how much funds you have, for instance. You know, you could say, I'm starting with the 1st of January and then always add 13 days. That's easier in a way because it's less material to analyze, it's going to be cheaper to do. If you've got more money, you say, I'm doing every 4th week, every 4th day. It really depends on resources and research questions. If it's important for you to have data from every week, at least, because you want to do some timelines, then you at least need 1 day from every week, I would think. If it's not important to you, it could be bigger, the interval. But some sort of randomness would be nice.
Like, I'm looking at like for 5-6 years continuously.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a certain issue, and that issue doesn't replicate every year in the same period of time. So, will it work if I take a very, very random sample? It has to for like purposive or something like
It's
that.
a purposive sample. It's a purposive sample because here the question was he's interested in looking at newspaper coverage about certain issues, and those issues only come up at certain periods of time. So yeah, naturally, if you could do a random sample, but you would probably miss a lot of information that would be very, very relevant for your study. So you'd rather go for a purposive sample in that case, but that limits whatever you can say to those periods that you look at. And then you can, within that purposive sample, still think about random sampling. So you say you've got 2 months here, 2 months here, 2 months here. You could still say that's too much, I can't do that much, so I only take every second day from each of those 2-month periods, which would indeed allow you to say something about the 2-month periods entirely, while not investigating the entire month. So I think it's often much easier with people than with content analysis stuff, because there even more depends on the research interest that you have and on the resources and so on and so forth. And often, I readily admit that often, if not most of the times, what we do in content analysis has some purposive element to it.
Identified by some parameters.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to have some parameters to figure out certain
Sure.
cost.
So that's something to keep in mind, and rather than within your purposive, it's almost like you purposively build up a new population from which you then could draw a sample.
So what is optimal stratified sample?
Optimal stratified sample. That's sub-variations of the stratified sample in the way that you have to think hard. Can you help me, Tamras?
It was in your graph. So if you look at
It's in this one, right?
Yeah, because
Oh, you know, there it is. Yeah, this one. Yeah. Optimal application. That's when you don't want to. I need to think a bit harder. That's when you don't want to maintain the characteristics, the proportional distribution of characteristics in the population, but you want to come to some optimal comparison. So you would say that you, I'm interested in comparing male and female students at this university. Yeah? And the proportion, as we said, might be 60-40. So a proportional allocation would be the one that we just talked about. In my sample, I would maintain that proportion 60-40. Now I could say, given resources and my research interest, I want equal amounts of males and females in my sample in order to compare them well. In this case, it wouldn't matter much, but imagine the distribution of the population would be 10 to 90%. Then it would be very hard to say something about those few of the 10% group. And I would optimize my allocation in order to say something about the differences by sampling more of this group and less of this group into the sample.
When you were discussing this stratified sampling, and it is necessary to set the percentage. For example, for your purpose, you decide that there will be 10% of the people who will be loving the chocolate and 40% will be loving the ice cream and the rest 50% some other things. Is it necessary to set a percentage for these groups to draw the sample from every every group?
No,
I think that would be proportionate allocation.
No, it's not because often you can't. Often we don't know what the distribution of the real population is. But we know that, and we'll come to the Indian case in a second, we know that certain districts or certain blocks, certain suburbs are maybe characteristic of something and important to be selected in one way or the other, to be included in the sample. If you do a survey in a small country, it's important to not just ask people in the city, but all in the country, and that could be a first stage of allocating people to different groups, because you want to make sure that even there's only few people in the country that will be in the sample.
For example, there are 5 groups of people who read different 5 newspapers. Every group reads a single newspaper. For example, the Hindu, the others, the rest of the newspapers. Is it necessary to select, for example, if we have a population of 1,000 people who are reading newspaper 1, then second group there are 2,000 people. We may not have an appropriate figure. Can we select, for example, the same number of persons from each group?
You could do that if you've got a very specific interest in comparing those groups.
When we are stratified, as to my knowledge, we think it's not necessary to set a percentage of selection from every group. We can select, for example, 5 from one group, 5 from second group, 5 from third group, and 5 from fourth group. That would be the second option. And when you are setting a percentage, then it's proportionate. That the number of people in a group and representing the number of representative people from the same group will be as per the total number of people. So that will be proportionate.
Yeah.
So for example, 10% of the people read paper A. So we will select from the total sample.
Yeah.
The 10% of people will be representing the paper A.
Yeah.
But if we have 5 papers, we are not setting any proportionate, the number of readers per paper. So we will be selecting, for example, we have 50 sample size, so 5 newspapers. So we will select 10 people from each of the group.
Yeah.
So that would be optimal allocation.
That would be optimal allocation, because if you're interested in this case in specifically comparing readers of those different newspapers, you want to make sure you've got equal numbers of those readers
from each
in your group, because that allows for a good type of comparison. Yeah.
But then that won't be maintaining the proportion of the...
Exactly.
So proportion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it maintains the proportion, because you randomly select from the different groups. It maintains the proportions of characteristics within that group.
Because I think
Since you want to compare groups in this case, because you need to have this very specific interest in comparing groups, that's fine again, because this sample will represent the characteristics of that population, this sample the characteristics of that population, and then if you want to compare those populations to each other, it's fine. But indeed, your sample that you come up with in entirety doesn't share the characteristics of the entire population research purposes.
Let's say we have a small sample size. Between stratified and systematic random sampling, which one does give us the best results?
Can I come to sample sizes now? And then that maybe answers part of your question. Where were we? So yeah, the random start stuff, that's something we just discussed. In the interest of time, I'm rushing through these a bit, because this is basically repeating some of the information that was on the other slide. So if you're interested, have a look at that again.
So,
And yeah.
in one of the slides you showed me something about cluster random sampling.
Yeah.
Is it
Let's maybe discuss, because we're getting very close now. And Taris actually sent me an email this morning and said, hey, this is what we did in the Indian election study, which is indeed a combination, if I understand correctly, of it might be worthwhile to have him actually explain a little bit what happened. And this is the email that he sent me, or parts of the email. So maybe in what
no need to read it. You can read it later. So just to answer your question, it depends, as the previous question, it depends upon the kind of resources you have. For example, the size of population. It's not possible to know like how many people are reading which newspaper or what news. So you have to really randomly select. And if you are doing, just let me explain, and if you are doing your sampling correctly, then there is, I would say 95% probability that your sampling would be representative of the entire population. And that's what we have seen in our election studies in Bihar, in Delhi, and in West Bengal. It was highly representative of the entire population. Then again, I need to explain to you our pilot study which happened in 2013 Delhi Assembly election. And at that time we made some mistake. And the mistake was, so let's going back to this PPS sampling, which is proportional to population size. And this is one of the cluster sampling. So first, if you are doing an election study, what you have to do is to first take Lok Sabha constituencies as a starting point. And we know like each Lok Sabha constituency is further divided into assembly constituencies. And within the assembly constituencies, then you have to, so first you create a cluster of Lok Sabha constituencies, taking into account India is highly diverse, caste, reserved constituency or unreserved constituencies. And so these demographic factors are very important, rural or urban. And then you take assembly constituencies, again taking into account all these factors. So you are creating a cluster cluster of upper caste, lower caste, Muslims dominated constituencies, non-Muslim dominated constituencies, then further you have to take into account if you want, for example, New Delhi, or if you want to go to GK, it's upper middle class constituency. So you have to take all these factors into account when you are creating a cluster. Once your cluster is created, taking into account all your variables or all your research questions, and then you randomly select people from the voter list. So each of the assembly constituency you can take I think one assembly constituency has at least 200, anything between 200 to 900 polling booths. And out of 900 polling booths or 200 polling booths, we took 5. And again, it was a random selections. And out of those 5 polling booths, then we took out a voter list. And from the voter list, we went to every 21st people. So this is again the randomization. And just to tell you about our West Bengal studies, according to the census, 48% female. Election Commission data, 48% female, 52% male. Our sample had 47% female and so 53% male. So very close to representative sampling. Again, with STs and STs, we were able to achieve very close to election data, census data. And similarly with religious group, it was slightly. For example, Muslims were 27% in Bengal, but our sample had 22%. And then tomorrow you are going to discuss about the weight. So
it's a bit response rate and weight which is more.
So this is how you select. So again, just 1 minute more to go back to 2013 studies. So in 2013 studies, we created a cluster of district instead of Lok Sabha constituencies, and that's where our sample became completely unrepresentative. So we could not publish anything out of 2013 data in any international journal, because again, if it's not representative, then it's very difficult to publish anything out of that. So that's what we learned in 2013 studies, that you have to really be very careful about your research questions, what you want to achieve, and what is your what would be your best proportional best sampling method. So again, to come back to your question, if your sampling method is correct, then there is a high probability that it would be representatives of your population.
Thanks. I thought this was easier actually. It's interesting. You see there's different steps of random selection involved in this process. So every step you can make random, you should make random in a way. And why is it done this way? Because probably you didn't have a list of all voters of the country or in the regions that you were interested in. I mean, probably would have been hard to get a list of all eligible voters in New Delhi. And that's why you choose these stepwise procedures, still ensuring random selection and some proportional distribution of characteristics.
We had a voter list, but in India, again, is highly diverse currently. Caste, religion, and rural and urban. So all these, we need to create a cluster of that. For example, some constituencies will be highly dominated by upper caste people. On the other hand, other constituencies will be highly dominated by lower caste people. So if you go for randomization from the beginning, there is a high probability that all your sampling cluster, all your constituencies will be represented by only upper caste people. So that's where we created a cluster of upper caste constituencies, lower caste constituencies, Muslim dominated constituencies, urban constituencies, rural constituencies.
The important thing maybe is the selection of characteristics that you look at: urbanization, religiosity, religion, discrimination, class, and so on. Of course, that's only a selection of characteristics, but having a good selection of those and having many of those factors being involved in building your clusters actually tries to ensure that you get a fairly good sample, as in this case was the case.